Okay, so, I realized that part of what happens for all of us that have discovered that we are in these narcissistic relationships is kind of a brutal sort of tearing apart of deconstructing our lives a lot of times. And we can figure out that if we uncover what's wrong with our relationship, say with our spouse, and we deconstruct it, we figure out they don't have empathy. We also figure out that they don't love us. That's a brutal, brutal realization. But it gets worse because then we can realize how we got there and that we were really raised to be that way, which means that we can then look at our parent relationship and realize there was a problem there too. And going further and further, we can look at friends and ex-boyfriends, and it can be really brutal to realize at whatever age that this happens to you that you may be fairly isolated, be fairly alone when you realize that very few people, if any, have reciprocated your quality of love, have given it back to you, because you've been surrounded by people that are incapable of it. So that's a really, really tough thing. And of course, that all came to this huge pinnacle for me when dealing with the loss of a child, which was just absolutely tragic. It's tragic for anybody, but really tough when your other relationships were, dysfunctional. And so I had, new relationships in place, but still very few. I mean, I just basically my husband and his family. There were, I hadn't cultivated a lot of new friendships and things like that because I'm writing and working from home. My focus had been basically on helping trying to get my son well, and focusing on my family. And so it was pretty tough when my son died, and I didn't have a big support system around me. So one thing I found that kind of helped was this exercise, and I want to invite you to try it. Look at your life. Part of the thing is that we have to embrace reality about what being raised by narcissistic parents or whatever, what that meant, and that's a pretty brutal thing. If your narcissistic spouse or your narcissistic parents were all bad, it wouldn't be so painful. The thing that's so painful is that there were good times. There were things that you remembered about them that were endearing. There were things about them that were fun. There were exciting times. There were, times when you did believe that they loved you. And there were qualities in you that wouldn't be what they are today had you not been raised by those parents, or even not been married to that spouse. So what I invite you to do right now is make a little list of the things about you that are especially good, the things that got stronger or bigger or better in you because of that unfortunate situation, because of the pain you suffered, because of the abuse that you went through. And so I did this, and so here's my little list to get you started. One thing that came from my being raised the way that I was, what that meant was that I got a lot of time with my grandparents, which was a really great thing because I had really wonderful grandparents, and they were a real contrast to each other. They offered us really a lot of really great qualities that were completely opposite from each other, and both quite different from my parents. And I got this well-rounded set of values because of being raised by my grandparents. I was kind of given a whole set of skills that a lot of people my age don't know. I mean, I call them the feminine arts. Very, very sensitive to the needs of others. I'm sensitive to picking up on other people's emotions and caring about how the effect I was having on other people and caring about other people's needs. Of course, now we know these all have shadow sides. All these things have dark sides. So I'm talking about the qualities that are good in you once you get a grip on yourself. You figured it all out. Now you can take the things and use them for what's good and not have to be, obviously, being other-centered, completely other-centered could end up with you being a complete doormat and getting taken advantage of and all those things, which is what happened to us. And so once you're not doing that anymore, then you can be grateful for the sensitivity it gave you to other people's needs without being used. Now, there are different kinds of experiences that people have in narcissistic families, and sometimes the parents are very controlling overly critical and they can be disabling. I've seen real up close relationships with people have their parents, where their parents always told them that they couldn't do anything. They made them feel very dependent on them and that kind of thing. This was not the case with my parents. My parents erred in just the opposite direction. They basically really wanted us to be little grown-ups. They wanted us to, there was no real payoff, emotional payoff for being needy, for being sad, for being incapable, or anything. The big emotional goodies were there, which was basically approval, being able to keep the fear of rejection and abandonment at bay. Was how you did that was by being happy, independent, productive, successful, having accomplishments, doing well, basically self-sufficient, self-disciplined, basically productive and not needing much. So what this did in me was it really bred in me a self-sufficiency and a self-discipline and an ability to self-soothe and an inner drive and qualities that have really, really served me well. They also bred in me qualities that made it possible for my ex-husband to take a lot of advantage of me and for me to end up driving myself into having a heart attack in my 30s and all this stuff. But that was before I had a handle on it. But the long-lasting, the things that in the whole course of life, these abilities to be a self-starter and to be able to soothe myself. And I'll tell you what, if I did not have the ability to soothe myself with what's happened, I don't know how I could have made it. I don't know how I could have made it, especially because I just didn't have, they go together. I didn't have the community around to soothe me. So it would have been bad. It would have been really, really bad. I was very, very appreciative because compliments and attention kind of stuff didn't come my way very often. When it did, I really, really appreciated it. And so what this meant was when I got into the world and friends and people who were more normal about things like that, I always felt my friends were, really generous with the things that they would do for me and all that. And I always really, really appreciated everything that anyone did. And with my parents, I always really appreciated it when they did any kind of nice gesture, even a card where they did more than just sign it. It meant the world to me. And I'm still like that. I always just, and then when I met my husband, the husband I have now, I was just so appreciative, and he was so generous and lovely, and it just meant so much to me. Of course, now I'll say the other side. The downside, of course, was that I had really low expectations earlier in life, and too low. My expectations, my standards were too low for how I was to be treated. As I got well, it kind of raised my expectations. That I had such high expectations for myself that I had to, I had to be all these things, but really low expectations for how other people were to treat me. I would justify, but I would still feel bad. It wasn't like I didn't notice. And I always would kind of think, I always felt like I was setting an example. Like, I'll act this way. It basically, like, I definitely enacted the rule of if you want to have a good friend, be a good friend. I definitely did that. Like if I was dissatisfied in my marriage, I just became more and more giving, hoping that it would come back to me. And of course, in a healthy relationship, that would have worked. This is, of course, the thing is that you utilize all the philosophies and all the things that they tell you in normal therapy that would work with a normal person, and of course it doesn't work here. So I was gritty, and I definitely had a stoicism about me that have served me well. Those came about from my childhood, being raised the way that I was, and the grit and the stoicism, it did definitely play into a lot of denial and things like that early on. But the lasting things, even after I got well and got over all that, has been this lasting sort of grit and stoicism, which serves you. It serves you no matter what. And then there were other things. There were things like, my parents were good dancers. So I loved to dance. My dad loved music. We had a lot of music in the house, and when he would play, he'd blast music while we were still sleeping in the morning, or had it on late at night when we were sleeping, which is the narcissistic side. But usually it was when he was happy. When the music was playing, he was happy. And so I came away with this association between music and happiness that I passed on to my sons. And my oldest son became a musician because of it. Because they didn't treat us like kids, because we were treated basically always like little grown-ups, we got to do a lot of things that kids don't normally do. I learned how to handle myself in a lot of situations, a lot of more formal situations, and got to have some experiences like that learned a certain level of manners and sophistication. They talk to me like a grown-up always, and that's how I've always talked. So I developed a vocabulary and an ability to converse with just about anybody on an adult level. That was always really helpful. It has served me. I definitely had this solid foundation of caring about family and being a family person and having really strong values that were a little bit old-fashioned even. Being with my grandparents a lot too, but definitely with a work ethic and a sense of integrity and a lot of old-fashioned kind of qualities, really, but still also an open-mindedness. I was around nice things and able to appreciate nice things and grew to develop my own personal style and a sense of taste without believing that it was all that important, without believing that it was what we were about. I was not raised to be dependent on anybody or looking to anybody to take care of me, that's for sure. And I appreciate it, what a great partner I have now with my husband, and because he really does take wonderful care of me. It made me a better mother, to be frank. I was really devoted to my kids. I was really devoted to giving them unconditional love and being there and showing up and not ever letting them think that they'd be abandoned by me or anything like that. And so I was steadfast, and my kids felt loved, and we were very close. I can say that one of the things that's come from everything that's happened to me is that there is really nothing that frightens me anymore. There is nothing that I'm afraid of. There is nothing that could happen to me that hasn't already happened. And so there's a certain fearlessness in that. I mean, what could anybody do to me that hasn't already happened? So that I've already lived through. I know the indestructible part of me. I know that there's certain things about me that are indestructible. I said this optimism. I always believed that whatever I was going through was not going to be permanent. That these were going to get better. One thing that came of my parents' narcissism was that even though I may have been their scapegoat or whatever, I still knew that I was their child, and they were so superior, or they were so thought that they were so special that at least meant that I had to be. I at least knew that I was smart and all this stuff because I was their child. And so the definite messages that I got in my childhood was that I had everything on my side. I was privileged, and I was smart, and I had every opportunity to have this great life. Basically, I was set up so that I could get credit for anything that I did that was good, and then if anything went bad for me, I could blame myself. And so, that was definitely a setup too. But the upside to that is that I never expected really anything bad to happen. I expected that I always thought things were going to get better. So even in the very worst of times, I always expected things were going to get better. And so I never gave up. I was gritty and had a resilience in that. Some could call it magical thinking, but it served me. And sometimes you have to have that. Sometimes magical thinking gets you through. So that's definitely the tricky lesson to learn in the whole thing between law of attraction and embracing reality and all that stuff, is to figure out when your positive thinking is magical thinking, and when you're in denial, and when you're just thinking, when you're just manifesting for a better future. You have to be the difference is that you know the reality. You're not deluded. So it wasn't like when I was thinking that things were going to get better, it wasn't like I didn't realize that they were pretty bad. I definitely realized that they were bad. Unlike earlier, there was definitely a time when I was definitely deluding myself and not letting myself know how bad things were. And part of that had to do with I just didn't know. I didn't have a reference point because I'd always been treated that way. So I didn't know that I was being emotionally abused because everyone around me was doing it. So, what about you? Now it's your turn. What qualities in you ended up becoming extra strong or extra developed because of your difficult childhood or your difficult history, your difficult marriage, or whatever it was? What in you what was the blessing of that? What was the silver lining? Wherever you look, you could always find a silver lining. Sometimes you have to look pretty hard. I get that. I do. Believe me, I do. But if there's anything that I can be an inspiration for, I hope it's that anyone can pretty much look at me and go, okay, if she's still standing, if she's still finding a silver lining, I certainly can. You know, I didn't want to sign up for that job, but that job has landed in my lap. And so I am putting myself out here on YouTube to say, okay, folks, listen, I am somebody here that's all this stuff has happened to. And I got back up. And then after I did that and I rebuilt my life, then my son died. And I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still smiling. And I'm still believing in something good is going to happen. And that there's a reason to keep going. And that there's a future and that life is good. I'm still here believing that. So hopefully that inspires someone out there. Okay. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Maybe you're